All right.
I thought you were a ventriloquist.
Hold
Okay,
on.
I think we're live, Julie.
Does it say we're live?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We have Dr. Fellner, Mike Richard, myself present. You had a chance to read the minutes of the previous meetings?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting as presented.
I will second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, do we have any amendments to the agenda tonight? Okay, I'd like an approval of the agenda as published.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, tonight we got a presentation from Miss Lund about a sewer rate study, and if Matt or Tom or Nikki has anything, I'll turn it over to Dawn.
No, Mark, I think just go right to Dawn. I think this group remembers that in 14, we lowered sewer rates significantly, and that's had some consequences. And you hired Dawn to help us figure out how to stop the erosion in the fund balance and do it in a staged way. So that's all my intro tonight. Thanks.
Okay. Dawn, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm going to turn off my video because I'm actually going to show you a presentation. And when we get to questions, I can turn my video back on. I think it's just maybe a little less distracting. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And we'll get the presentation going. Can you see that presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm here to present the findings of a wastewater financial projection. As indicated, you did have a rate decrease in 2014. That was kind of phase one of this. The idea was to spend down some of the cash balance. But now we're at a point where we need to move into phase two, which is kind of turning that spend down around and stabilizing that. And that's what I'm going to show you tonight. First of all, just a little bit about our firm. I'm Dawn Lund, Vice President of Utility Financial Solutions. We provide consulting for utilities across the country, Guam, Canada, and the Caribbean. We also teach these courses and speak about financial planning and speak about cost of service for organizations across the country. But I'm going to jump right into some of the key financial targets we're going to talk about. I want to talk about debt coverage ratio, minimum cash reserve, and operating income. These are three important financial targets that I look at them together to see how they work together to develop a plan. The idea here is to turn the utility, stabilizing that cash spend down, but with the lowest rate track that we can in order to make that happen, to minimize the impact to our customers. And I use these three key targets to help me do that. And then of course, we're going to talk about suggested rates tonight. But I'm going to start off with a table that simply there's about, I don't know, 30 spreadsheets, 30 tabs of a spreadsheet that kind of roll up into this. So I'm giving you a greatly summarized look at things here, but the three key targets I'm going to talk about tonight are operating income, cash balance, and debt coverage ratio. This first table that you're looking at is showing a 5-year projection without any rate changes. And I happen to throw in a bond here in this last year. You've got an extraordinary capital improvement. You actually have two what I would consider extraordinary or larger capital improvements, one in 2024, about a $275,000 capital improvement, and then $1 million one in 2025. That's extraordinary. So I threw a bond in there. So you need to know that right up front, because this cash balance that turns negative would obviously be about $1.2 million worse than what it's showing on this summary. But what it's showing is the system is currently operating at losses. Those losses are projected to continue over the projection period without any rate increases. If you recall, you did have a quite substantial rate increase in 2014. Since then, the utility has been operating at losses, which has produced that cash spend down. That was the initial intent of that decrease. Now we're at the point, though, where we've spent down from a little over $4 million to about $2 million today. And we're at the point where we need to start maybe developing phase 2 of the plan, where we stabilize that cash bleed. So when we look at that and look at the 3 key targets, I'm going to go over why these are important, how they're determined. I've got the actual calculations, but what operating income tells you is if I'm fully funding the system, all my operating expenses, my depreciation, everything I need to be funding in the system, this number would be a positive, I don't know why that marker keeps doing that, but a positive $400,000 each year. You can see that even with a rate track, and I'm going to talk about this rate track in a second here, my losses start to decrease, and I eventually turn to a positive operating income in 2024. 2025 even gets a little better. However, I'm still not meeting that minimum $400,000 target. That just means that I'm not fully funding the system, and that's okay if I can look at these other 2 key targets and determine if they're healthy. I'm going to go over the other 2 key targets real quick, why they're important, then I'll stop for questions. But obviously the cash balance, we look at certain risks unique to the wastewater utility to determine what a minimum cash balance should be. And when I say minimum, I mean critical. It's not a cash balance target. It means if I'm approaching this minimum, we've spent our cash down to the lowest we want it to go in general. That minimum is about 1.5 million in round numbers. You can see that I'm certainly spending down to that level in 3 years, and I'm starting to swing back up. Part of that swing back up is I'm bonding for that extraordinary capital, and that's helping my cash balance there. But we certainly don't want to spend cash down much more from the level that we are projected to spend down. Our debt coverage ratio, what this ratio is, it's simply a measurement of debt affordability. Can I afford the debt I have out on the system? If I cash flow enough from operations to pay my debt service payment once, this number will be a 1. You can see in this first year, I've only cash flowed about 75% of my total debt payment in that year. In year 2, I just cash flow enough from operations to pay my debt service payment once, and so forth. That target continues to improve. So when I look at these 3 key targets, obviously when the system's operating at losses, our cash spend's down to negative. My debt coverage ratio on the prior slide wasn't even close to a 1. It's not a perfect financial picture we want to continue with. It's time to look at phase 2 on how we can straighten this around. What I've developed here is a plan, and I'm going to show you the impacts to the customers, the average residential customer, but a 9.9% rate increase each year for the next 5 years. You can see that it just simply turns operating income around, not till the 3rd year. It simply stabilizes my cash balance, and that's with a bond issuance. And it does get my debt coverage ratio to healthier ranges. Before I go into any more detail or show the impact to customers, do you guys have any questions on anything I've covered?
I just have one, Don. In 2025, what's the 1.2 bond issue?
That's for capital. There's $275 of capital in this number that the utility is willing to bond for, and $1 million worth of capital here. I can freeze my screen and let you know what those projects are, unless Nikki or Tom's on the line. Maybe they know right off the top of their head what that is.
I'll jump in real quick and say that in 2025, that plant will be nearly 40 years old. And so there is a list of projected improvements, but I think it's safe to say that why that number is large or seems large is that we will basically be rebuilding the wastewater treatment plant. I don't think we need to build a new one by any means, but in the same way that we rebuilt that screw pump a few years ago and incurred some debt for, what we're envisioning out in it, you know, with constant, what I would say, maintenance on it, capital maintenance, we're expecting by that point that we're really going to need a big rebuild. So.
And that's why we're bonding, projected to bond in that period, because if we have an extra, I want you to cash flow from operations, normal, quote unquote, normal capital improvements, those things that, smaller things to maintain the system. When we have an extraordinary overhaul or some type of larger capital, it's not unusual to have to borrow for that. And that's why we just have it in that year. Are there any other questions before I go into some key target detail? And then I'm going to show you how this would impact your average customer.
Yeah, I just have one. You're showing targeted in 2021 and 2025, basically similar amounts. Where are those coming from, figures?
You mean the rate adjustment?
No, your target in.
Oh, the targets. Okay. Yeah, you actually led me right to the next 3 slides. Great question. I'm gonna click to that and I'm gonna show you this here. So I'm gonna start off, specifically, you were probably talking more about operating income and cash balances. Those are the second and third slide I'm gonna show you. I'm starting with debt coverage ratio here in this next slide, but great question. So what I'm showing you here is the detail of where these targets come from and how these targets are calculated. Debt coverage ratio, again, is a measurement of debt affordability. The formula is I take my net income, I add back my depreciation expense because it's a non-cash item. And what I'm trying to determine here is how much cash did I flow from operations in that year to pay my debt service payment. So I'm adding back also my interest expenses because it's in my divisor, and I'm trying to see how much cash I flow from operations before my debt payment. In this example, 2021, without any rate changes, I'm cash flowing enough from operations before my debt payment of about $187,000. My debt payment is $453,000. You can see I've cash flowed enough from operations, a little under half of what my total debt payment is. This would be considered an unhealthy debt coverage ratio. I want to add a minimum cash flow at least a 1, at least enough to pay my debt service payment once. But for prudent revenue bonds usually have a bond covenant requirement of a 1.25. And financial planning purposes, we like to flow enough from operations at least to pay our debt payment 1.4 times or 4.5 times or about 1.5 times. So what this is showing is using the standard financial formula, we're not cash flowing enough for operations to pay our debt. That means to pay our debt payment, we're drawing down on our reserves. That's why your reserves are dropping quite rapidly. You were at 4 million. You've spent that down over the last couple of years to 2 million. There's 2 reasons for that. One is you're operating at losses, which is also causing you to pull from reserves to pay that debt payment? So great question. I'm going to go to the next ones that you asked. They're similar. How did we calculate that? This is the next target I talked about, minimum cash reserves. What this tries to do is look at specific cash risks to the utility and determine what's the minimum the utility should hold. I look at O&M expenses and I reserve a 45-day working capital lag there. If you take 45 and divide it by 365 days in the year, you'll get 12.3%. That's simply a 45-day working capital lag. I obviously want you to have money on hand to pay your bills. That's the reason for that line item. The second line item is I want you to recognize you've got millions of dollars in infrastructure sitting out there. You could have a main break, equipment failure, whatever it may be. If you have a main break or equipment failure, I want you to have cash on hand to get that fixed and get the service working immediately, obviously. The next line item I look at is that debt service payment. I always want you to reserve 100% of your debt payment. You should always have that on hand in your minimum cash balance. And then of course I look at your 5-year capital plan and I reserve 1/5 of that. If you tell me you're going to spend, $200,000 next year on a capital improvement project, I want you to have $200,000 on hand to be able to do that at the beginning of the construction season. So if I add all that up, that using the methodology, my recommended cash minimum in 2021 is about 1.3 million. And of course, I don't just leave that static. These things change every year. It's the methodology I'm looking at right now, not the amount. And so as things change, of course, when I get to 2025, I use the same methodology, and that methodology produces about $1.5 million minimum. So those numbers are similar, but it is based on a formula. I would expect it to be similar. Obviously, I don't want your minimum cash balance to be jumping around. I want it to be kind of smooth. Of course, it's going to work upward with changes in your costs. So that's the minimum cash. And then operating income. What operating income is if I fully fund the system at about $400,000, I am fully funding everything I should be in the system. I'm funding O&M expenses, depreciation, and everyone is paying their fair share. If I do not meet this operating income every year, my current ratepayers are being subsidized by my future ratepayers. When you're operating at losses like you are right now, that just means my current ratepayers are not paying for the expenses and the infrastructure currently being consumed in the system. And what does that mean? Anytime I push off a needed rate increase, the rate increase doesn't go away. It only gets larger. So in this way, when we operate at losses, my current ratepayers are being subsidized by my future ratepayers. That's why we're trying to turn this loss around. So when I go through that calculation, obviously that's pretty stable, right around, call it $400,000 every year. If I'm fully funding that, I'm fully funding everything I should be in the system. And that's one of the key targets, that and that cash balance, why we have to turn this around. And what I had recommended was that 9.9% rate adjustment. And before I go into how that would apply to your rate structure and how that would affect your average ratepayer, do you guys have any questions on the key targets I reviewed?
Ms. Lund, did you, is 9.9 the only rate percentage we're going to discuss, or did you go through larger and different percentages?
So we initially, we did contemplate that. I can show you the program that will allow it to do that tonight. As we're speaking, you'll be able to see it immediately. I did try to keep that rate percentage under double digits. It's more of, quite frankly, a psychological take on it. to keep it under double digits. Could you support a larger rate increase? Absolutely. Let's go back to that initial slide here. I wonder if I can get rid of all this, get rid of all these. Well, anyway, I was going to try to get rid of all the red marks, but anyway, you can see that obviously you can support a larger rate increase than the 9.9. The losses here continue to grow, and even with the 9.9% rate adjustments, my losses don't turn around till year 4.
Thank you.
So great question. Yes, the system could sustain a larger rate increase than 9.9. We did discuss that. I tried to keep it under double digits because remember, this is the same exact picture that I painted for you months ago in water.
Yes.
It's the same picture. So, and again, you guys had a plan. Your plan worked for what you wanted it to accomplish. And now this is phase 2 of trying to turn it to stabilize the targets. So when we talk about a 9.9% rate adjustment, you guys charge just a commodity rate. You have a inclining block and then it declines for the larger users. That's pretty typical. Typically that larger user is an industrial customer, which has a much more stable usage load. That's why you will often see that larger user getting some sort of little break. It's more stable year round. It's not like a residential customer that uses household usage for 9 months out of the year, and then the other months out of the year they use sprinkling and really strain the system. An industrial customer is a much more stable load in general. So you do have that system, obviously just applying the 9.9 across the board, since this was a financial plan and not a full cost of service study by meter size or anything, that would be appropriate. How this would affect the average customer using 5 units or 500 cubic feet per month. They currently pay about $29 a month. This would move up to about $31.63 a month. It's about a $2.85 increase a month. Now, 9.9% sounds scary. I mean, any rate increase sounds scary, right? Nobody likes a rate adjustment. But when we talk about the dollar impact, it's about a cup of coffee a month to start turning these financials, to stabilizing the financials and turning them back around and stabilizing that cash burn. So you've got it in town and rural. Your rural customers have about a 1.5 multiplier. They would be affected by a little bit more dollar-wise, but the same exact percentage, obviously. So do you guys have any questions on this?
Dawn, the only thing I wanted to make sure for the folks that are listening in on this is originally the reason why that there was rate reduction in 14 was to reduce the balance. The balance was fairly high. It was felt that that extra amount should be given back to our customers, our citizens. So what we're looking at now is to, like you said, to stabilize that now. We reduced it down to where it needs to be, basically, and we need to now take and to make it so it's back to self-sustaining again.
Yeah.
I just that point out there.
Yep, exactly. What you intended to do worked. You did it, and now this is phase 2 of that plan.
Right.
Okay, I got a question, Don. On your money you like to keep in the bank, you said 45 days. Is that enough?
Great.
Because I know when we were in fiscal emergency, they wanted a 3-month reserve.
Yep. So great question. That was one line item of 4. Okay. When you actually look at the total overall days cash on hand recommended to about 200 days cash on hand. Now, that might sound like a lot compared to the typical 3-month. Okay, let's talk about that. In general, it used to be 90 to 120 days cash on hand was enough. But remember, what we're trying to do right now is long-term financial planning. And what like bond rating agencies like to see and so forth, that used to be a much lower amount. Bond rating agencies for a highly rated utility like to see about 200 plus days cash on hand. That's where this gets you in total. When I said 45 days, that was that one line item. But when we look at the whole methodology in total, the minimum cash I want the utility to hold calculates out to about 200 days cash on hand. Good question.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions about the plan?
You mentioned that you also designed the rates for the water system in terms of monthly dollars and cents. Is it comparable to the average?
Yep.
And that maybe not fair to make that comparison.
So I can call that up real quickly, but it's going to be similar.
Okay.
I think the water, we might have recommended a little bit higher than
Okay.
the 9.9%, as that utility even started with a lower cash balance. If you look at back in 2014, the wastewater utility had about 4 million. The water utility had about 2 million.
Okay.
So when we have cash spend down and water started with a lower amount to begin with, it's certainly, in order to stabilize that cash burn, that utility will probably see a slightly larger increase.
Thank you.
Good
Hey,
question.
Doc.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And Dawn, let me jump in if I might, Mark, and to say that we're looking at, I think the recommendation, without Dawn having to pull that up, is 2 years of just shy of 15%, the 990 kind of thing. I think
Right.
it's 14.90, and then in years 3, 4, 5, and going forward on that 5-year projection, more of the 9% rate.
Thanks.
So it would one thing that the only element open for discussion on water is whether or not to begin to recover in 2 years at that rate, at the 15% rate. Mark, I want to make one other quick comment.
Go ahead.
In addition to what Mike had said, which is absolutely right about lowering of the rates back in 14, I want to point out for both the committee and for anyone who might be listening to this, is there was a increase in our electric rates at that time. And while it didn't please everyone, the objective was to lower water and sewer rates, draw down the balance, as Dawn had said, but in many cases, particularly low usage residential customers, the electric increase was offset by the water and sewer decrease. So again, because we lived it, we may remember it more than somebody is just tuning in. So not only did we do, as far as the fund balance, draw it down, but there was also a reason to try to balance that within people's overall utility bill. So just a couple of factors to add in a little bit.
Right. Does council need to, this is again, a decision out of without legislation, correct?
No,
That's right.
sewers are, water is service director, sewer is council.
Thank you.
I think Mark and Doc, I think what we had hoped to do is have Dawn make this presentation and then allow people to think through it. I think most of this data that you're looking at, you can, see that to review, and then incorporate the start date for any increase that you may want to do, or the administration will decide on, kind of within the, sort of a January 1st start date, kind of fold it in, if you will, into next year's budget. So that was our time frame.
Great.
There's just one more thought I have on this, and my shocker, because I've had a chance to look at it and think through it. The one thing that we never factored in, that Dawn's pointed out, is this cost of capital recovery. We never looked at that and it's been pointed out, those are, one of 3 legs of this foot still, is to look at how much of our debt coverage ratio we have, or don't have in this case. And so I think that's factoring that in, it changes a little bit of how we look at how much money we need to operate on and to cover our necessary capital expenses. So that was news to me, I guess, what I'm saying, this debt coverage ratio.
Without wanting the entire 98,000 page report, can we get something emailed to us to look through?
That sounds like a question for the consultant.
Yeah, yes, yep, you do. You should have a report. If it wasn't distributed to you today, I'm assuming it'd be distributed to you tomorrow. You do have a full report with these key targets. I literally took this presentation and grabbed the tables from the report. The report obviously has a write-up with each table for better explanation. So yes.
Good. I assumed there was, and I assumed that it would be available. And if I didn't see it and it was distributed, that was my fault.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
No, I don't have anything.
Dawn, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for your time. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Don.
All right, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other business tonight?
I want to quickly jump in, Mark, and I will make it quickly. I'm not sure, I don't have a clock in front of me, so that could be trouble. We've been spending a lot of time talking to the state auditor, looking at different uses for the CARES Act money. And it seems to me one of the biggest needs that we have would be some sort of utility credit. And so I wanted to mention that. I've talked a couple of times, not maybe in committee, about it looks in the neighborhood of $550,000 to $570,000 that we'll have in total unspent COVID dollars. And so, we'll follow up as we get more information, but what we're looking at is notifying all of our utility customers, certainly this way, and also getting it out on our Facebook site. And then finally sending in next month's utility bill a notice that if any of our customers that have been adversely impacted by COVID making it difficult to pay their utility bill. We'll have a simple, it's not an affidavit, but it's a statement by those individuals that COVID hasn't impacted them. And then I'm proposing that we have some sort of credit. I don't think this amounts to much more, let's say, than $100 per account. And some people may sneeze at that, others that's pretty significant. And in order to follow the rules, we're going to need individual customers to come up and sign something saying that they were impacted. There's two things it appears that we could get ourselves snagged on. One is just sending it out to all of our customers. You're going to have to request it. And then the second thing is, if we were to have spent this money before you all passed an ordinance. So what we'll need to do is have council pass an ordinance in relatively near future outlining how we're going to use the CARES Act dollars. And then those two items, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Those two items will allow us to affect an audit. Those being, excuse me, doggone it. So those being a statement from our customer that's going to get the money, and also being able to demonstrate the council approved the program. So,
I got a question.
Yeah.
How is there a written paper, like not 9 miles long, of the way you can spend this money?
Yeah, I don't know if Matt signed off. If Matt's still listening, he can probably email to you. What we have is the best summary of the rules. And in it, we can't, you have to associate whatever credit we give to a business or an individual. We have to associate that with an account. We just can't send it out to everyone.
Okay.
So you have to ask for the money, I guess another way to say that.
Okay, what you just described makes more sense to me than how you kind of described it the other night of delinquent customers. You made it better sounding this time.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, you probably I'm not. This is it sounds like an overworked phrase, but a work in progress.
Right. I understand.
We're all of a sudden the money washes ashore. We have a short time to spend it. Yeah, I don't want to associate it with, let's say, people who are 60 days late. Some people might say that, well, that's a crowd that always runs 60 days late, and you don't want to. And this may piss some people off, but you don't want to reward those customers, and somebody that pays on time is disqualified. So as long as that individual, our customer, is comfortable saying that COVID has impacted their ability to pay their utility bill, that appears to be enough. Okay. So you'll have to, we're expecting to have over the course of a couple weeks, a few thousand people up at the utility office signing what I would expect would be a one-page, maybe 2 or 3 question application, request for funds, whatever term you want to use.
How are they going to determine
how available to businesses? If it's going to be a relatively small credit, because we've got 6,000 customers and $600,000, so that all the school kids at home watching this can divide that out and see that's only $100 per account. So anyway,
okay.
if there happens to be money left over, it's not a utility issue, but probably looking at ways to supplement the people doing food pantries or those drive-through food pantries. So either Second Harvest or some of the local churches. So I don't have that worked out real well, folks, but I do think that if there is a small amount, let's say a few tens of thousands left, that would be something that we could get into the local pipeline and get that expensed out by the end of the year. So that's plan B, if you will.
Just out of curiosity, Tom,
Mm-hmm.
the calculation you're going to figure to give per affidavit,
Yeah.
how's that going to work?
$100. I think if you do it on a percentage of how much is owed or something like that, then you get into, gee, if I'd have known that, I would have run my bill up to $3,000 and I would have gotten, X percent. So I think it's, and again, if the reason I'm bringing it up now is if there's probably a different and brighter idea out there to fine tune this a little bit. Like you said, Monday night, what I was discussing, I wasn't crazy about it. And I think what I mentioned tonight is a little bit better.
Yes.
Fairness and not having that 600,000 seems like a lot of money. It'll divide up fast, but not having that go to just a few hundred customers when I think everybody in town feels the pinch in one way or another because of the way this year's been going.
Well, if there's that much and you took all 6,000 meters,
Yeah.
and you gave this was a credit to our total bill,
Yeah.
which would affect everyone in town, wouldn't that work?
Yeah, except we wouldn't have that statement of need.
Yeah,
I really don't want to get weird about it and overly bureaucratic, but I do worry about something, let's say a year, this kind of how it went with, what was that called? The Obama stimulus, that it wasn't until a few years after all the money was dispensed and people were forgetting about that whole damn thing, that the Fed auditors coming through the state agencies came in and said, well, what about this cost? What about that cost? So I'm really trying to make sure that wouldn't happen to us a couple years from now, having disallowed costs. So I think what we've been trying to understand, and we've worked, Matt particularly made some phone calls to understand what the state auditor would require of us. That's why I think we just can't divide it up. We have to ask people to, if you will, request it or say they're in some, they need the money.
Okay, I got you.
It would really suck, wouldn't it? We're doing the right thing, and then somebody comes through 2 years from now and goes through, well, what about this one? What about that one? It's not worth $100. But if you want to come uptown and, I don't think there'll be lines for long. There may be a rush to begin with once this passes, but I think I'm pretty confident that we can in an orderly way, get this done and then have the paperwork and divvy it up in somewhat of a fair way. So anyways, I didn't like, and I'll stop after this. I didn't like the idea of it only going to people who were delinquent, because I know people have struggled, and it's COVID related, but they're going to pay their utility bill kind of first. And then people who use us like a line of credit, and there are some customers that do, then wow, they get a benefit because they let their account run late. That doesn't seem right. That maybe was what you didn't like when I was discussing it Monday, Mark.
Right, it is.
That's all I got on that. I appreciate the chance to sort of give you an advance warning I'm not sure if it's next council meeting in maybe needed voted on the agenda. It's likely the next meeting in October. I had to pin it down. That'll give us like 8-9 weeks to spend it. I know that sounds like it feels uncomfortable saying that, but when it comes to distributing a utility credit, I think that'll be people will spend up that money pretty quickly. So I'm not worried about having that money turned to dust like Confederate dollars, in January. And that it really appears what's going to happen if you don't spend it. That's not your money anymore. They'll reclaim it. I don't want that to happen.
One more question?
Yeah.
Is it the only thing you can use it for is utilities?
So, and if I had a plan, our plan B would be to understand better the rules that we could. One of the things I had discussed with Community Action is while they have the non-perishable food in their food boxes, perishable food, like particularly meat, is something that their clients, everyone involved knows is a void. They suggested if they had some money that they could use then to distribute to qualified folks in the community to buy meat at a local meat market or buy perishables at a local grocery store. I don't want to name the names of the businesses, but apparently they do that as part of Community Action's regular food relief. I also know that there's certainly at least one congregation in town and the combined charities that are distributing food. So to answer your question, are there other things? Yes. And in my judgment, that this ongoing need for food for families that are, that have seen a cutback, it's that may be something that we could look at. And then the final use would be to make it available to businesses. Again, in that we can't loan them businesses money, but we could grant them money. My expectation is by the time the utility program is completed, there won't be a lot of money left for distribution to those other two, the food program or possible business relief.
Okay.
But there's a bunch of them, and that's why I think I see Matt's back on. I think he'll probably send out to you all the best summary of all the outlined acceptable uses. Then there's also a paragraph or a few bullet points of things you can't do. So that might help you all. Fair enough?
Yep. Anybody else have anything?
I don't have anything, Mark.
Okay. Does anybody have any other business? Okay. Next meeting, November 4th at 7 p.m., assumably on Zoom. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, you do.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.